First, they came for Matt Campbell. Now for Coach Prime. Is Deion Sanders leaving the Big 12 and taking yet another competitor out of the race? Let's get Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Game Time. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. Appreciate you making it your first listen today and every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're going to talk about the interest between Deion Sanders and the NFL and what that means for Baylor and the rest of the Big 12, plus a look back at the doubleheader that was in Tempe on Saturday. And while both basketball teams got wins, wasn't all terribly positive. Plus, is Jerome Tang on his way back to Baylor in just a matter of time here with how things are going in Kansas State? All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. First, it was Matt Campbell. The NFL was coming for him. The Chicago Bears requested an interview with him. And now it seems like Deion Sanders is the next to get that NFL interest, because multiple outlets are reporting that there is a strong interest from Coach Prime to coach the Vegas Raiders. Las Vegas Review-Journal had a detailed story about it, about people close to Deion saying absolutely he is interested and is kicking the tires to see what this can be. And we know the Raiders went out and wanted to interview Mike Vrabel last week. That was that Patriots link, that Tom Brady link. And now Vrabel has been hired by the Patriots. So Deion Sanders could be a little bit higher up on the list for the Raiders. And we've heard his name kind of thrown around almost jokingly through a couple of teams, but the Raiders would make a ton of sense. If it's going to be anywhere in the NFL this year, it's probably going to be the Raiders, because A, they've got Mark Davis, who's just loony enough to try something like that. They brought back John Gruden after like 15 years away from coaching. And the Raiders need a quarterback. And one of the top, if not the top quarterback prospects in the NFL draft this year is, of course, Shedeur Sanders. And the last couple of years, Shedor's been pretty successful playing for his dad. And his dad is going to have a say in where the kid is going anyway. He denies it now, but he said it for months. So I think if you're the Vegas Raiders and you're going to go in on Shedeur Sanders anyway, might be worth a shot. Because I'll give Deion this. Deion, I thought's done a good job. There are people that think he's running college football, even though he's never beaten a ranked team or won a conference championship. But I think Deion has done a good job. And what has most surprised me is, the people that he's brought in and the way he's kind of been hands-off in a sense, in terms of he doesn't want to be the play caller. He doesn't want to be the quarterback's coach. He doesn't want to be anything like that. He wants to be the head coach. He wants his offensive coordinator to do their thing, defensive coordinator to do their thing. And that's not always the case in college football. And it's not always the case when it's a big name player like Deion Sanders was coming into the world of coaching college football. And you do have to remember, he had very little coaching experience at all before Jackson State. And then he goes from the FCS to a Power 4 team. And in their first year in a new Power 4 conference, he turns them around. They go from 1 win to 4 wins and all kinds of hype. And then 4 wins to what? 8, 9 wins this year at Colorado? I think it was 8. I think they were 8-5. And right up till the very last week of the season, we're in the conference championship picture. So there is some of that where it's like, hey, we know if Deion comes in here and he brings in the right guy on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, he could be a head coach in the NFL. He could be. And that news would be terrific for a couple of these contenders in the Big 12 this year. I don't think Colorado was going to be up to it right till the final weekend like they were this year. I just think losing the Heisman Trophy winner and arguably the number 1 quarterback prospect in the draft is not a recipe for, they'll just be right back here, despite what the Colorado fans think. Again, Deion, I think, is a good coach. He's not that good a coach that you just turn it right back around and win 10 games. But They are a team that's kind of one of those wild cards. Again, I think Baylor, BYU, and Arizona State positions themselves pretty well going into this next season. And then, of course, Iowa State and Kansas State bring a lot back at the skill positions. We don't know, obviously, with Iowa State's coach. And Colorado, you think, well, they do bring some guys back, and they've got a good recruiting class coming in. They're always going to bring guys in through the portal, like a top 20 portal class this year so far through the first window. It's like, well, that's a wild card team there. Take Deion Sanders out of the equation. Nope. Sorry. You're building it from scratch again. And you're building it from essentially where it was 2 years ago when Deion took over. Because again, another compliment to Deion is whatever good has happened in Colorado the last 2 years because of him and Shedeur and Travis Hunter, right? Like he changed the culture there. That's Deion's culture. Good, bad, or otherwise, it won 8 games this year, and they're building off something, and they're getting blue chip prospects. That's not happening if you bring in some dipstick. It's not going to happen. Whomever you would get this late in the cycle. Colorado's a decent job. I wouldn't say it's one of the greatest jobs in college football. Especially having to follow up something like the Deion Sanders experience. So if Deion's gone to the Raiders, which it could happen, by the way, they're interviewing Pete Carroll this week. Like, I don't know. Deion might be just as exciting to them as Pete Carroll would be, even though Pete Carroll does have plenty of success at the NFL level. So if Deion is in Vegas rather than Boulder, that's one less team to worry about. That's one less program to worry about. And let's take it a step further and stop looking at it from the Raiders side, but from the Deion Sanders Colorado side. Would it stun anybody if he wants to move on, especially to an NFL job? It's not shocking to me. Again, I don't even mean this as necessarily a bad thing, but Deion wanted to coach his son and Travis Hunter in college, or sons, because Shiloh was on the team too. He was on the team. He wanted to coach his sons and Travis Hunter and make Jackson State into something, and then make Colorado into something. And now, the two sons and Travis Hunter out of the picture in terms of Colorado. It's like, what's really keeping Deion there? It's a guy who's a celebrity more so than a football player / football coach. What's really keeping him down there? So if he goes to Vegas, which plenty of people are reporting, there's a lot of interest there. And we do have to remember, this is Mark Davis that owns the Raiders. Tom Brady has some say in this, but this is Mark Davis that writes the checks and owns the Raiders. Crazier things have happened. And if it's going to happen to any franchise, they're going to pull a Deion Sanders out of 2 years at Colorado and make him their head coach in the NFL. It's the freaking Raiders, man. It's the Raiders. That's the team that's going to do it. And I think Mark Davis probably thought, oh yeah, Brady will go and get us Mike Vrabel. It's not happening. They would be crazy to pick Deion Sanders over Ben Johnson, but that's a discussion for another podcast. What we're looking at here is how it impacts Baylor and the Big 12. And if Deion is gone, that just takes another team out of it. I'm telling you. And it opens up a lot for a lot of other teams in this conference, because Colorado's a wild card anyway, but take them out of this thing, or take Deion out of this thing, that's one less team to worry about. Let me know what you think down in the comments below if you're watching on YouTube, or tweet at us at Locked On Baylor. Let me know what you think. We roll on with a little basketball discussion and the weekend that was in Tempe. Was it more bad than good? You could argue that. It's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, a message from TurboTax, read by me, host of Locked On Baylor, Cam Stewart. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and all those frustrating forms. And then you had to wait and wonder and worry if you were going to get any money back. Trust me, sometimes you don't get a lot back. Now, Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert, by the way, who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you can do what you want. And you get your money back, the most money back, guaranteed, all while you just go about your life. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Rolling on with Locked On Baylor. It was a 2-win weekend for Baylor basketball on the road at Arizona State. But both of those wins had a little something extra to them, right? Men's basketball, it was not pretty. It was not pretty. They were shorthanded. They win the game in overtime, but they came really close to blowing this thing. They really did. They were up, I think, 15 or 16 at one point, and really, had control of the game from minute 2 or 3 to minute, 38, 37? Like that whole in between, Baylor was playing great. And I just couldn't think of any bad things to say about their performance, really. Although, again, Jeremy Roach and Jaden Nunn did not have good games. In fact, Scott Drew said that Jeremy couldn't throw it into the ocean on Saturday, which was true. But then they fall apart. And Arizona State comes right back into this game, and they tie it up right at the end of regulation with like 3 seconds left. And bam, we're now heading into overtime. And you're shell-shocked. You're like, am I in a fever dream? It's late at night right now. What the heck just happened? The end of regulation was so poor from Baylor. And really the last 5 or 6 minutes, it's the same thing that we saw last year. They just stopped playing. They stopped playing offense. Remember how, and 2 years ago they were doing this a little bit too, but last year specifically, it was so frustrating. They completely blew that game at UT. You remember that? The buzzer beater. They completely blew it because they just stopped playing offense. And it's so frustrating to watch. And I don't think this team has the offensive talent that team had last year, but still you're playing like a 90-second offense with 6 minutes left. You're trying to shrink the game with 6 minutes left. I hate it. And it's so baffling, especially with just how efficiently you were playing most of the game. Again, not a great offensive performance, but it throws away what was a damn good defensive performance for so much of that game. Now they got it together in overtime. They took better shots and they walk away with the game in overtime. But that should have been a double-digit victory. I'm sorry. I know it's a road game in the Big 12, but that place sounded like a friggin' library on ESPN Plus, which was not a great broadcast. So maybe it wasn't that dead in there. But it's not like you're going to Fog Allen or Hilton or even Lubbock. Like that's not an intimidating place to play outside of the curtain of distraction. And I know you're shorthanded, but like Arizona State's not good. They're not a very good basketball team. They haven't been for a while. I don't know how Bobby Hurley still has a job. And amazingly, they do have a guard on their roster named Bobby Hurley. He must be dangerous. But you limited their 2 best players, right? Sanan, however you say it, from Fall River, the freshman sensation. He only had 5 points, coming off a bit of an injury. Quaintance, he didn't show you anything. This is a 5-star kid who is projected to be like a lottery pick. 5 points for him, a couple of blocks. Didn't do much, played all 40 minutes, didn't have that much of an impact on the game. In fact, I thought Norchad kind of bullied him a couple of times. So all that to say, I'm not using the short rotation and the road game thing as an excuse. Scott Drew did. He said this was the first time we've been in a game like this year. I thought UConn was a game like this, but I digress. I think that still should have been a double-digit victory. Like Arizona State stinks. I'm sorry. That's not enough of an excuse for me. I do want to break down some more of this game in the evening edition of today's show. So Monday evening, if you're listening to this afterwards, it might already be up. But I do want to talk about that game a little bit more. But the women walk out with a 18, 19-point victory. Easy work, light work for the team formerly known as the Lady Bears. 19-point victory, 78-59 is the total in that one, including 29 points in the first quarter. Now, they gave up 18 in that quarter, but still. The story of this game was the ejections. Dariana Littlepage-Buggs has enough of whomever the scrub is for Arizona State, and they both kind of get to swinging. And Dariana gets ejected. 3 Arizona State players get ejected. 2 that left the bench. It's right before half. It's a big time kind of. It's a weird moment because it's a fight. They both swing, but it's not like a brawl or anything like that. I don't think either of them really got their money's worth. But this girl is throwing some elbows in there. Some of it's just, hey, good hard boxing out, hard basketball, but she's throwing some elbows in there. And Dariana, I think at some point, is just like, you know what? I've had enough of this crap. Had enough of this crap. And by the way, the Arizona State player does throw the first swing. She's throwing some elbows, then she throws a swing, and Dariana gives her the business back. I'll friggin' give you one. If that's how you're going to play, I'll give you one. Now, it doesn't help that, Dariana is probably the most effective player up to that point. In fact, Nikki Collin said as much in her press conference about her thoughts on the fight and how her player and her team handled the whole thing.
I was proud of Bugs for not really engaging. And so to be ejected when she really didn't engage and was in protection mode is tough. But I'm really proud of her. I'm proud of our bench for staying put, because that impacts a lot of things. And so definitely a little adversity, Bugs was 5 for 6 in her whopping 13 minutes. And so she's a kid in a game like this where we felt like she had an advantage on the offensive glass. We knew she was going to get rim run layups, like all the things that she's great at. To eliminate her from the mix was tough.
It was tough. I get it. That's kind of how basketball works. Once you throw something, you're out. But clearly, it should be like hockey. Clearly, she's not the instigator there. She's having elbows thrown at her. There should have been a foul call before that. Again, I know some good hard boxing out. That was not it. I can't show it because I'll get demonetized. But just throwing elbows, and then she throws a swing at Dariana. And this ASU girl is lucky that Dariana didn't knock her out, if we're being totally honest. I would have had a hard time restraining myself. And also, kind of like hockey, where you don't want to get goaded into an extra penalty. That's exactly what happens with Arizona State's bench. 2 extra players go out on the floor. You're gone too. And so good on Baylor a little bit. If this turns into more punches being thrown, then it's a different story. Then you got to stand up for yourselves. But keep it calm. Let them lose their head, because clearly that's what they were doing. They were frustrated and they were losing their head. Let them do that, and we win the game. And that's exactly what happens. Arizona State, Dariana Littlepage-Buggs was having a really good game, like Nikki Collins said. And so that's tough to take her out, but Arizona State takes 3 players out. And the women's basketball team, formerly known as the Lady Bears, runs away with this one. Great game from Sarah Andrews. Really terrific game from Aaliyah Matharu, the Florida transfer. Had to be her best game since joining the Bears and getting eligible to play. She was terrific, I thought, on both ends of the floor. And you really saw where the hype was around her coming into this team. She is going to help this team a lot, especially, obviously, with Jana Van Geitenbeek out for the season. This team is still, both teams, I think, both the men's and the women's team, but specifically here with the women's team, I think they are still finding their footing a little bit and seeing where they fall into this conference, because I think, again, I still think if things go right for them, if they start to hit on all these cylinders, like Matharu comes in and is an all-conference player like the way she was in the SEC, and Aaronette Vonleh has another terrific game, if she's the post that we thought she was coming into the season, there's no reason they can't really compete for the Big 12 championship. And we are going to learn some more coming up, I think, next week. They play number 1 in the country, standalone game, Baylor UCLA. That'll be very interesting. Let me know what you guys think about the fight down in the comments below, or again, tweet at us. I thought it was I thought it was one of those where sometimes you got to swing back. You got to teach them a lesson. And it's too bad that that Dariana got ejected for it, but the Lady Bears rolled on and won the game. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Locked On Baylor rolls on as well to talk about one of our favorites and potentially a prodigal son. Is the Jerome Tang era coming to an end at Kansas State? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Baylor. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff game is an incredible experience, I think, that brings fans together like never before. I remember this excitement for those past playoff games and the selection and finally lacing it up and finally playing the game. Can't wait to someday go to one of these games with the updated format, more games to choose from. The place I'm going to buy my tickets is Game Time. It's got a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. Filters out all the fluff. Fluff is something for sandwiches with peanut butter, not for buying tickets. It only shows you the incredible deals on great seats, so you're not wasting your time. I did it a couple weeks ago for that college hockey game at Wrigley. It was awesome. I found the best deal right away. I knew from the view from my seats it was going to be tough to see the puck, but I couldn't pass up on a deal like that. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. I regret to report that I believe the Tang Gang is losing its luster in Manhattan, Kansas. And that's true. I don't like to report that because all of us here at Baylor would love Jerome Tang, love the success that he had early on at Kansas State, hate that he beats Baylor all the time. Don't love that. But such a great ambassador for Baylor for so long. Like that's a guy you can't help but want to be successful, even though he's in your conference. And right now, things are not going well for Coach Tang and the Kansas State Wildcats. It was ugly over the weekend. They lost by 30 to Houston. Really at home, by the way, at Bramlage, the Octagon, they lost by 30 points to Houston. Houston's a good team, don't get me wrong, but they gave up 87. And it's bad. They're under 500 right now at 7-8, and it's been a really tough road for them. They're down near the bottom of the Big 12 standings. They're in 14th, they do have a Big 12 win over Cincinnati. So do we. But they lost by double digits to Oklahoma State. They got blown out by Wichita State. They lost to Drake at home, got blown out by St. John's. Like they lost to Liberty. Remember that? They lost to Liberty in November. Like this is really not good. And there was a ton of friction between Tang and the president last year with that player who was suspended indefinitely. And it's now becoming like it might be borrowed time. Like I think the fans are starting to get upset. And there's already that friction between you and ultimately your boss, the university president. Like this might not be a good thing for Jerome Tang right now. And I don't know how much better this gets for Kansas State this year, especially with, I think an improved quality in the Big 12. We don't have as many teams up at the top like we had last year in this conference. But you saw the way Tech played Iowa State. You saw the way, Colorado beat UConn earlier this year, and West Virginia's had a couple of big wins. They beat Gonzaga. They beat Kansas. So there is still a great element of quality in this conference. And I just don't see a world where Kansas State rattles off 7 or 8 in a row. By the way, they do not play Baylor this year. So if this is truly kind of the march towards the end for Jerome Tang, you got to think Scott Drew's going to call him and say, hey, you're a head coach. You're a good head coach. We know you're going to be a head coach again. But how about this? You come back here Be our lead assistant again, like you were so successfully. We go on, maybe we go to the Elite Eight, maybe we go to the Final Four because you're that missing piece. And then you've got your pick again, because then people will not remember the last season at Kansas State after you do that. They'll remember the fact that you took them to the Elite Eight year one. And we're a couple possessions away from the Final Four. That's what they'll remember. But Kansas State, of course, they're worried this is going to become another Bruce Weber thing. Like, I understand that worry. It happens to all of us at some point where you're like, ooh, we had it with Dave Aranda in football, right? Like, oh man, he had that one good season with other guys' players and other guys' players. Like, is this actually going to turn around? That's what they're thinking about at Kansas State right now. But if you're Baylor and this thing does go south for the Wildcats and Jerome Tang is relieved, fired, like, you'd take him back in a second. I think this next thing I'm going to talk about gets a little overblown, but the proof is also kind of in the pudding, in a sense, of after Jerome Tang left, this team, this Baylor basketball program, while still successful in some ways, did lose kind of its luster, lost kind of its edge. They have not been a good defensive team since he left, is really what I'm getting at. They have not been a good defensive team since then. I think they're figuring some things out on this year's team, but they have not been the suffocating defense that they were with Jerome Tang. And you really see it the last 3 years of Tang being there, when you've got the Jacobs offense in full effect and that Tang defense in full effect. You go from 26-4, number one ranked team in the country for however 5 or 6 straight weeks in 2020, could well have been a Final Four team if that tournament doesn't get canceled, national champions the next year, to regular season conference champs and a number one seed again the next year. Like, that was the best 3 years Baylor basketball has ever had. And it was because those two things were clicking on all cylinders. You had the Scott Drew leader of men. You had the Jerome Tang defense. You had the John Jacobs offense. And it was all there. If this doesn't work out for Tang in Manhattan this year, Baylor should be that first call. Baylor should welcome him back in a second. And it might only be for a year or two. And then he might go on and become a head coach again. He's certainly capable of that. But that might be the missing piece for Baylor to get back to where they were a couple of years ago and really competing for the highest honors of college basketball. Because I think the last couple of years they've had the talent to do so, but something has been missing. It's not been put together. I don't know if it's Jerome Tang or not. But look, after Jerome Tang left, it became a lot more difficult for this program. And now you're making excuses as to why they're losing in the second round every year. It can't be a matchup thing every single year. So if that does happen that way, and this is his last year at Kansas State, we will bring the Tang gang back to Waco. Let's do it. But honestly, maybe this is just the compassionate guy in me rather than the Baylor sports fan. I do hope he figures it out at Kansas State. I really do. He's just a guy that you root for, man. I'm sorry. I can't say a bad word about him. He's such a good guy, and I think he is a good basketball coach. But this right now is a very tough situation in Manhattan, the way things are going. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Would you take Jerome Tang back at Baylor? And if you're a Kansas State fan watching, what's the issue here? Is he on borrowed time? Is the seat as hot as it's been? Let me know down in the comments below, or tweet at us at Locked On Baylor. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you like the video, like the video. It really helps out the channel a lot. And we're on the march towards 4,000 subscribers. We need your guys' help in that. I know there's still a ton of you that watch and listen every day that are not subscribed. It helps out, and it gets you these videos faster. You can also ring the notification bell to get notified every time we're dropping a video on YouTube, because then after that, it's going to be wherever you get your podcast. We'll catch up with you later today and talk a little bit of men's basketball and maybe a potential football hire. That's going to be coming up later today on your favorite show. Thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. That show is Locked On Baylor.